It started in a quiet room above the city. One boy, one line of code, and the system that was never supposed to break. They called themselves Vex, Kade, Dusk, and Malone. 4 kids chasing control in a world that never gave them any. One breakthrough, one command line, and the world's most secure crypto vault opened like a door left unlocked. $230 million. Gone in minutes. No faces, no traces. Just ghosts in the network. But power always leaves a trail. And when the law came knocking, there was nowhere left to hide. Malone stands at his window, staring down at the flashing lights below. Still, silent, knowing this was the moment it all ended. This isn't about money. It's about friendship, betrayal, and the code that changed everything. His name was Malone Lam, and before the world ever found him, he'd already lost himself.
The names I'm about to use, they're not real. They were code names. Back then, none of us knew each other's real names. Not where we lived, not how we looked, not what our lives were like. Just handles, P, G, P keys, encrypted rooms. Vex, Kade, Dusk. That was our little crew. 4 ghosts connected by fiber and arrogance. And the weirdest part? I felt closer to those guys I'd never met than to anyone sitting right next to me in real life. You ever have that one night that splits your life in half, before and after? For me, it was that kind of night. It's strange how normal it felt at first. Just the quiet hum of my laptop, the light bouncing off my hands. My room dark, except for that glow. I still remember the message that started it. Vex. You in? Me. Yeah. That was it. 2 lines that changed everything. I grew up in Singapore. Not the rich skyline version people post about online, but the ordinary, overworked one. My parents wanted me to have a proper life. University, stable job, predictable income. But predictability never sat right with me. I wanted to see how things worked behind the wall. The code, the locks, the mistakes. At 15, I was already tearing apart routers, building little exploits on school Wi-Fi, sneaking into systems just to see if I could. I told myself it was curiosity. But curiosity is just ambition with less honesty. Crypto came later. That was what pulled me in completely. A world made of trust and math. No banks, no middlemen, just these elegant strings of numbers that meant power if you understood them. You know how some people get hooked on games? For me, it was that, watching digital money move invisibly across the world. It felt pure, like a game for the smartest people alive. That's how I found them. Vex was the planner, cold, efficient. He'd talk like a strategist more than a hacker. Kade was the loud one, always trying to prove he was the best in the room, always turning everything into a competition. And Dusk, he was quiet, analytical, the kind of guy who only spoke when it mattered. We met in an encrypted forum that didn't exist a week later. We didn't even have profile pictures, just usernames and code. But still, somehow, it felt like a brotherhood. It started small. We'd test each other's methods, build tools, joke around about stealing from scammers, or testing, exchange vulnerabilities. And somewhere along the line, those jokes started turning into plans. Vex was the one who found the mark. Whale wallet, he said. Custom interface, self-hosted security. He sent screenshots of a transaction log, and even I could see it. The patterns, the timestamps, the human habits. That was the crack. You can build the perfect system. But people are always the flaw. We spent weeks just watching. Watching when he moved funds, when he logged in, what browser he used. Vex tracked his timing like a metronome. Dusk mapped the wallet activity against IP logs from a tiny side server the guy didn't even realize was leaking metadata. Kade, of course, was already designing the fake update page. Pixel perfect. Same fonts, same shadows. We weren't rushing it. We were sculpting it. You ever get obsessed with a problem so deeply that you forget the rest of the world exists? That was me. The idea that I could outsmart someone who thought he was untouchable, it was addictive. It wasn't even about the money at first. It was about the feeling of control, like holding lightning in your hands and thinking, maybe I can keep it. And we justified it, we really did. We told ourselves we were testing the system, that we'd found a loophole, and we were just demonstrating it. We built a whole moral philosophy around it. But deep down, we knew it was bullshit. We wanted to see if we could get away with it. When the night came, it wasn't dramatic. It was silent, surgical. Vex gave the signal. Dusk uploaded the payload, a cloned wallet synchronization page disguised as an official update. Kade ran the back-end logging tool, which looked like an authentication verifier. I sat there watching the clock tick. Every second felt too long. And then it happened. He logged in. Clicked, typed, confirmed, just like we hoped. I remember watching the data feed through, seeing those private keys appear like little strings of light. The moment they hit our system, I felt something electric. It wasn't excitement exactly. It was more like disbelief. You don't feel $230 million. You just see numbers rearranging themselves on a screen and realize that the world has shifted around you. Vex just wrote, "We're live." Kade dropped a row of fire emojis. Dusk, as usual, said nothing. He just started the scripts. We'd rehearsed those moves hundreds of times. Wallet splitters, mixers, tumblers, tiny shards of Bitcoin bouncing through layer after layer until they'd become untraceable. We moved fast, clean, quiet, and then it was done. 4,000 coins, $230 million, just like that. I remember leaning back, my heartbeat loud in the silence. I thought I'd feel triumphant, like in those movies where the hacker cracks the vault and laughs. But all I felt was quiet, heavy quiet. You ever win something and immediately feel like you lost something else? That's what it was like. But of course, Kade was already celebrating. "We're legends," he said. "This is history, bro." Vex replied, "Don't get stupid." And Dusk just wrote, "Delete everything." That first night, I barely slept. The screen kept flashing in my head, those green confirmations, the code running, the idea that my laptop was the bridge between someone's fortune and my guilt. I thought, no one's ever going to believe this. And I guess, in a way, I didn't either. The next few weeks were chaos. Money was digital, but paranoia was real. Every sound felt sharper. Every notification buzzed like an alarm. We went full stealth mode, new accounts, new proxies, physical air gaps. I even swapped laptops, destroyed hard drives. We all did. But you can never really delete the feeling that you've already crossed the line. And still, we celebrated. Quietly. I bought a ridiculous watch, not because I wanted it, but because it felt like I was supposed to. Like, what's the point of being rich if you don't look rich, right? But it was hollow. I wore it once and put it in a drawer. You can't wear something like that without feeling the weight of how you got it. Then cracks started forming. Kade couldn't keep his mouth shut. He bragged in a side form, dropping cryptic lines, teasing people who suspected too much. Vex lost it. "You'll burn us all," he said. Kade laughed it off. "Relax, man. No one can trace this. We're ghosts. But that's the thing about ghosts. They leave cold spots." It started with a Reddit post. Someone noticed a pattern on the blockchain, a transaction trail that looked too clean. Then another thread, then a journalist digging into an unknown wallet exploit. The pattern wasn't solid yet, but it was there. I felt my stomach sink the first time I saw someone publicly mention the same cluster we'd used. You ever get that slow panic that crawls instead of hits? That's what it felt like. It wasn't an explosion, it was a slow leak. Air leaving the room, control slipping, and then one day, Dusk went offline. No message, no signal. His PGP key revoked. Gone. Vex tried reaching him for 2 days straight. Nothing. That silence was worse than a confession. Because when one of your crew disappears, you don't know if he's hiding, flipped, or caught. You just know the ground beneath you isn't stable anymore. We kept moving. Constantly. I changed hotels, countries, usernames. I deleted everything and started again. But paranoia makes you sloppy. You second guess your own encryption. You start thinking everyone's watching you. Even your own webcam light feels like an eye. You tell yourself it's fine, but every knock on a door feels like the end. At one point, I found myself just staring at my laptop screen for hours, scrolling through the ledger, watching the trails I'd tried to erase. I thought about the guy we took it from, some investor, probably early crypto. Maybe he built that fortune from nothing. Maybe it was all he had. The story started to look different from the outside. I told myself I didn't hurt anyone. But the truth, I didn't know that. I didn't know what those coins meant to him. If they were savings, if they belonged to investors, if losing them wrecked lives. You tell yourself, it's just numbers. But behind every number is someone who trusted the system. Someone like me. That's the part that haunts you. Not the chase, not the crime, but the moment you realize you became the thing you used to criticize. The news broke weeks later. Teen suspected in $230 million crypto theft. My name wasn't in it yet. They didn't have proof, but they had pieces, and that's how it always starts. Small pieces connecting slowly until one day they form your face. Vex was furious. We lay low for 6 months, we walk away clean. He said, don't move. Don't talk. But Kade couldn't do it. He moved too much, spent too fast, tried to cash out big chunks. The blockchain doesn't forget. It just waits. It records everything. Every transfer is a whisper waiting to be replayed. I stopped sleeping properly. I kept checking the news, the forums, the markets. Every time the price of Bitcoin moved, my chest tightened like it was tied to it. I wasn't free. I was owned by it. And when the door finally opened that morning, when the knock came and the sound of steps filled the hallway, I didn't fight. I didn't even speak. I just remember thinking how quiet it was. No sirens, no shouting, just efficiency. Cold and precise. That's how systems take you apart, not with noise, but with process. You think the punishment is the arrest, but it's not. It's the reflection, the replay, the questions you ask yourself afterward. Like, what was I trying to prove? And did it ever make me happy? You tell yourself it was about freedom. But what kind of freedom traps you in your own head? If I could talk to that younger version of me, the kid who thought hacking made him special, I'd tell him this. You were already special. You didn't need to burn the world to feel it. Curiosity's a gift. But without direction, it becomes destruction. And I learned that the hard way. Sometimes I still wonder what happened to the others. Vex, Kade, Dusk. Whether they're free, caught, or hiding under new names. Maybe they're still out there, typing on keyboards in the dark, pretending they're untouchable. Maybe they're just ghosts now. Same as me. And maybe that's what we always were. Not legends, not villains. Just kids who thought being invisible made us invincible. You ever wake up and for half a second forget who you are? Then it all comes flooding back? That's what the first morning after the arrest felt like. The room was gray, sterile, humming with that recycled air that smells like electricity and fear. The walls weren't walls. They were reminders. You can't lie to a room like that. I remember the officer's voice, calm, not angry. That's what threw me off. I'd built up this image in my head, flashing lights, shouting, chaos. But no, they were quiet, organized, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Malone Lam, one of them said, reading from a sheet. You're under investigation for cyber intrusion and theft of digital assets. Hearing your full name like that in someone else's mouth, it's surreal. Like it doesn't belong to you anymore. They didn't ask for passwords right away. They just asked questions about routines, about who I talked to, about where I'd been. They already knew most of it. They were confirming, not discovering. That's the part that breaks you, realizing they're not looking for answers. They're watching you find out that they already have them. They had pieces of chat logs, traces from a relay node we thought was safe. Some fragment of a server Dusk had set up months before, left hanging on an IP that didn't fully wipe. You always miss something. Always. I thought of all the times I'd said, "We're invisible." I almost laughed. Invisible? No one's invisible when someone really wants to find you. The first night in that cell was the longest thing I've ever lived through. It wasn't the bars or the lights, it was the silence. No messages, no pings, no encrypted threads waiting for me, just stillness. You don't realize how much noise you live in until it's gone. I kept thinking about the others. Vex, Kade, Dusk. What happened to them? Were they free? Watching the news like I used to, waiting for my name to show up? Or were they in similar rooms, staring at similar walls? They separated us in every sense. No contact, no updates. That's how they break networks. They don't have to chase everyone. They just wait for isolation to do the work. The first lawyer they sent me was government appointed. Polite, overworked, clearly unimpressed. He called it theft at a digital scale. Said it like a label, not an event. I told him I didn't even care about the money. He didn't look up from his notes. "You will," he said. "You just don't realize what it means yet." I didn't sleep much those weeks. I replayed everything. The night it started, the feeling of control, the messages from Vex, the arrogance. It all felt so small now. Tiny, stupid moves that looked clever only to us. You ever look back at something you thought was genius and realize it was just luck dressed as skill? That's what hacking feels like, when it collapses. When they finally transferred me for questioning, I met the lead investigator, an older guy, probably in his 50s, gray hair, calm tone. The kind of person who didn't need to yell to get the truth. He didn't come at me with threats. He just talked, asked me to explain my methodology, like he was interviewing a student about a project. I tried to sound composed, technical, but he kept circling back to one thing. Why? And I didn't have an answer that made sense outside my head. Because we could. Because I wanted to feel like I mattered. Because the system made me curious and then punished me for looking too closely. Those weren't real answers. Those were excuses in fancy packaging. When you strip away the justifications, you're left with the truth. I did it because I wanted control. And control is the one thing you never really get from stealing it. Weeks turned into months. I learned the rhythm of confinement. Time doesn't pass. It loops. You measure it in noises, the clank of metal, the echo of footsteps, the hum of a fluorescent light that never stops. You start to crave something unpredictable, a new sound, a word, a change in tone. Somewhere in that fog, I heard that Vex had been caught. Different country, same chain of evidence. His arrest made headlines in the tech forums, but not for long. People move on. The internet forgets fast when it's not personal. Kade's trail went cold. No one could confirm if he'd been found or if he'd disappeared for good. Dusk, still nothing. Maybe he really did vanish. Maybe he's still out there, using a name I wouldn't recognize even if I saw it. You ever think about how fragile friendship is when it's built on secrecy? We were brothers until the silence came. Then we were just usernames again. There was one night, maybe the third month, when I got transferred for a meeting. My lawyer had new information. They're offering a deal, he said. Testimony, cooperation, reduced sentence. I remember staring at the table, that cheap wood surface between us, thinking, what does cooperation even mean when your friends are ghosts? It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me still wanted to protect the myth, the story of the crew, the brotherhood, the untouchable code. But that story had already collapsed. I wasn't protecting them anymore. I was just protecting the version of me. I'd built inside it, the one who believed he was smarter than the world. So I talked, not everything, not betrayals, just truth. The mechanics, the vulnerability, the timing, the things they already half knew but needed confirmed. And it's weird. The more I spoke, the more I felt a kind of relief. Like finally putting down something heavy you'd been pretending wasn't there. Still, there was guilt. Talking meant letting go of the only world that ever made sense to me. But maybe that's what growing up is. Realizing some things you built to protect yourself are actually the things holding you back. The day they sentenced me, it didn't feel real. Reporters outside, cameras flashing, everyone talking about the crypto prodigy gone wrong. I hated that phrase, prodigy. Like it made the crime poetic. It wasn't. It was just stupid ambition in a digital suit. I didn't serve as long as I could have. The deal helped. But time isn't measured by calendars when you're stuck. It's measured by thoughts, by regrets that replay in slow motion, by the questions you can't stop asking. And the biggest one? What could I have done with the same skill if I'd aimed it somewhere better? That question haunted me more than any punishment. When I got out, the world had moved on. Crypto had gone through new booms, new crashes. Kids younger than me were trading coins I'd never heard of. I was old news. The internet had turned me into a cautionary meme. Some called me a legend, others called me an idiot. Both were probably right. Freedom didn't feel like freedom at first. Everything was louder, brighter. People looked at me like a rumor. Even when no one recognized me, I still felt watched. That's the irony. I used to hide behind screens because I wanted invisibility. Now I couldn't disappear even if I tried. I kept to myself. No computers for a while. No coding, no forums, no backdoors, just paper, books, walking at night when the streets were quiet. I started journaling. Yeah, sounds cliche, but it was the only way to make sense of the noise in my head. Sometimes I'd write to the others, even though I knew they'd never read it. Letters to ghosts. You ever try to rebuild yourself from scratch? It's like picking up sand. The harder you grab, the more it slips. But if you go slow, if you're gentle, some of it stays. I kept replaying one night in particular, the last night before it all fell apart. We'd been celebrating in our own way, half asleep on adrenaline, half drunk on ego. I remember Kade saying, "We actually did it, man. We're ghosts." And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I needed to believe it. If you'd asked me back then what scared me most, I'd have said failure. Now, it's success without meaning. You ever chase something for so long that when you finally get it, it just feels hollow? That was us. We'd pulled off something insane, a digital heist that should have felt like history. And yet all I could think was, now what? After prison, I tried to disappear quietly. Got a small apartment, kept my head down. But the internet doesn't really let people disappear anymore. Every few weeks, a message would slip through. Someone asking, "Hey, are you really him?" Some wanted advice, others wanted bragging rights. One kid said he wanted to carry the torch. I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it. A torch sounds heroic until you realize it's just fire. And fire burns everything it touches. I started volunteering at a local tech center, teaching basic cybersecurity to teens who reminded me of, well, me. They were curious, brilliant, impatient. They'd stay late, asking how systems really worked, how people got caught, how close they could get without crossing a line. And every time, I'd hear my own younger voice in their questions. So I told them the truth, that the line isn't about code, it's about intention. You can learn to break things, sure. But learning to build, that's where the real power is. Funny thing is, I didn't even plan to start talking publicly about what happened. It just happened. Someone invited me to a podcast, said they wanted to hear my side. At first I said no, but that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those kids, about all the people online glorifying hacks without seeing the cost. So I called back. And when the mic turned on, the words just spilled out. I told them everything. Not the technical stuff, the human part. The late nights, the fear that hides under bravado, the silence between friends when things go wrong. When the episode came out, it went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. People heard the cracks in my voice, the pauses, the regret. You ever share something so personal you feel lighter afterwards, but also exposed? That's what that interview did to me. It made me free, but it also made me accountable. People started messaging again, but this time it wasn't fanboys. It was others who'd messed up, who'd crossed lines and didn't know how to come back. And I realized maybe that's my real work now. Not hacking systems, hacking guilt, finding ways to decode shame, patch regret, rebuild trust. One night, months later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No name, no greeting. Just one line. Still out here. Hope you're good. D. Dusk. I stared at that screen for minutes, maybe hours. Didn't reply. What could I even say? Hey, I betrayed the silence but found peace? There's no version of that conversation that doesn't sound like confession and apology twisted together. But seeing his message made something in me settle. At least one of us was still breathing, still trying. Sometimes, when the city's quiet, that deep 2 a.m. quiet where streetlights hum louder than people, I'll sit on my balcony and think back. Not about the code or the money, about the boys behind the code names. Vex, with his restless brain. Kade always trying to turn chaos into a game. Dusk, the ghost who could disappear in plain sight. We weren't villains, just kids who mistook skill for wisdom. And that's the thing about power. It shows up before you're ready to hold it. You ever forgive yourself halfway, then stop? That's where I live now. Half forgiven, half haunted, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to erase what happened, but to understand it. To learn from the mess instead of pretending it never existed. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere close to where I was, staring at code at 3 a.m., thinking you're untouchable, thinking no one's going to notice, just ask yourself one thing. Why? Why do you need to break something to feel seen? Because trust me, being seen for what you destroy feels nothing like being seen for what you build. You want the real high? Create something that doesn't vanish when the server crashes. Something that doesn't depend on hiding. Because the moment you start building, you realize control isn't stolen. It's earned. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd used the same energy differently. If we'd built tools instead of traps. If we'd helped instead of hid. Maybe we'd still be friends. Maybe we'd be running some startup, laughing about how we almost threw it all away. But that's the thing about life. You only ever see the clean path once you've taken the messy one. And I took the messy one. I lived it. And now, I tell it. So yeah, that's the story. The heist, the crash, the reckoning. You ever wonder what happens after the movie ends, when the credits roll? This is what happens. You wake up one day, years later, sitting under a different name, with the same memories, trying to make peace with a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. And some nights, when the wind hits just right and the city sounds like static, I swear I can still hear them. The echo of a group chat that's long gone quiet. It's not guilt anymore, it's just memory, and maybe that's enough.